Mr. Edward Benjamin Chandler was born May 27, 1852, in Woodstock, Connecticut. The youngest of 4 children, Mr. Chandler attended Yale University, graduating from the Sheffield Scientific School in 1875. He came to Texas 2 years later, first to San Antonio and then to Uvalde, where he was appointed Deputy District Surveyor for Uvalde County in December of 1878, and then County Surveyor for 1882 and 1883. He returned to San Antonio in 1883, entering the land surveying, title, and mortgage loan business with the firm Patterson & Chandler. Mr. Chandler's continued success included representing large mortgage and investment companies and a large clientele of individual investors. In 1917, he formed a partnership with Gus Gruss, E.C. Tarrant, S.L. Stumberg, and Guy McFarland. E.B. Chandler & Company continued well beyond Mr. Chandler's lifetime, and his partners were instrumental in the success of the Chandler Memorial Home. Mrs. Chandler, May Velder, was born in Texas in February of 1958 to Louise and Frederick Jacob Velder. Her mother died when she was only 8 years old, and May was raised by her maternal grandmother, Frances Fanny Lamb, in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. May moved back to Texas with her Aunt Mary following her grandmother's death in 1875. Her father made his home in Texas after remarrying in 1870. Colonel Jacob Velder was a lawyer, legislator, and Confederate officer, having served as a district court judge and representative in the Constitutional Convention of 1875. The town of Velder is named after him. Except for summers spent at the Greenbrier Resort in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, May lived in San Antonio with her Aunt Molly until 1884. Having met in the years following Mr. Chandler's return to San Antonio, Mr. and Mrs. Chandler's romance culminated in their marriage in 1885 in New Orleans, Louisiana. Shortly thereafter, the couple returned to San Antonio, living on South Florida Street and later Ramona Street until such time as their home at 127 West French Place was completed. The original home was constructed in 1887 and is thought to have been designed by architect C.A. Coughlin and his young partner Atlee Ayers, who would later become a neighbor to the Chandlers, living at 202 Belknap just down the street. Much of the original home's interior style and decoration was the work of none other than Mrs. Chandler herself. An avid sculptor and painter, Mrs. Chandler was frequently recognized for her talents. At the San Antonio Van Dyke Art Exhibition in 1888, Mrs. Chandler was awarded an honorable mention for wood carving, a silver medal for still life in oil, and a gold medal for landscape in oil. Within her home, Mrs. Chandler's talents in wood carving are showcased in the dining room's mesquite panels depicting a wide variety of hardwoods, flowers, and other plants, as well as the grape clusters and sunflowers adorning fireplaces, bookcases, and cabinets in the parlor, dining room, and in her own room on the second floor. Her love for painting could be seen in the oil-on-wood images of flowers and birds adorning the main staircase, as well as the corn and banana trees on 2 doors that originally hung on the second floor. It was a common and reasonable assumption that the renowned Impressionist painter Julian Onderdonk, who grew up right across the street at 128 West French Place, must have lent his hand in bringing color and life into the Chandler home. But in fact, Julian's father, Robert Jenkins Onderdonk, Julian, and even his younger sister Eleanor drew inspiration from Mrs. Chandler, immortalizing her and the home in their own works. One of Julian's earliest pieces, Picket Fence View of the Chandler House, and a later unnamed charcoal drawing, depict the Chandler's house from his own home. Robert Jenkins Onderdonk's well-known painting, Mrs. E.B. Chandler in Her Room, depicts a young Mrs. Chandler sitting in her bedroom facing south towards downtown with the clock tower and quadrangle of Fort Sam Houston in the distance. According to an article by Dorothy Galloway in the San Antonio Express on May 30th, 1926, this very painting, along with watercolor paintings of their summer home in Bass Rocks, Massachusetts, and other examples of Julian Onderdonk's work, hung on the wall of the drawing room and parlor for residents of the Chandler Memorial Home to enjoy. In one of Eleanor Onderdonk's signature miniature portraits, currently in the Dallas Museum of Art's collection, Mrs. Chandler sits with her dog, most likely close to her beautiful gardens. The Chandlers continued to update and add on to their home during the 36 years they lived there. To the east of the dining room sits the sun parlor, built in 1895, where wicker furniture, a swing, ferns, and vines made a pleasant place to sit or read while looking out over the lawn and gardens below. The house was expanded more than once, and the grounds surrounding the home were well known for the flowers Mrs. Chandler took great pride in growing for all occasions. From Mrs. Chandler's own artistic contributions to several 140-year-old cast-iron fireplaces with hand-painted tile surrounds and colored glass windows throughout, the Chandler's home was always intended to bring light and joy to those who lived and visited there. Mr. and Mrs. Chandler loved to entertain guests at their home, but they also knew the importance of giving to those in need. As president of the Associated Charities, E.B. Chandler gave of himself, but also encouraged others to give through programs and charity drives, such as the Kitty Club, the Red Cross, the Young Men's Christian Association, and the Young Women's Christian Association. It was this unselfish spirit which inspired and led to Mr. and Mrs. Chandler planning during their later years for the perpetuation of their home for the happiness of others. Mrs. Chandler passed away on Christmas Eve, 1922. And Mr. Chandler joined her only 7 months later, in July of 1923. As part of their will, the Chandlers left their home and fortune in the care of a trust led by E.B.'s former partners to establish the Chandler Memorial Home for aged gentlewomen in needy circumstances. Although given all of the ideas and plans before the Chandlers' passing, the trustees' efforts were clear, as a large addition and renovations were completed to the original home in less than 7 months, with the building permit issued on February 28, 1924, and the home completed and dedicated in September of 1924. The additions and changes the Chandlers made to their own home were intentional, providing up to 21 ladies the space, medical care, and assistance they needed, while doing so in a non-institutional setting. The Chandler Memorial Home was intended to always feel like a home, decorated in much the same way as it had been and with many of the Chandlers' personal treasures. For 45 years, the home operated as intended by Mr. and Mrs. Chandler, providing for its residents, which included some very notable women of Texas. In 1968, however, the trustees recognized that new state licensing requirements necessitated a change. The home was closed and given to Morningside Manor Inc, a senior living nonprofit organization in San Antonio, along with the land, furnishings, and an endowment. A new 120-bed nursing home was built between 1975 and 1977, and a 3-story apartment building was completed in 1978. Renovations and repairs were also made to the house for its use as a senior activities center. In 1997, additions to the nursing home and a new assisted living facility were completed, and since the closing of the Chandler Memorial Home in 1968, Morningside Manor Inc, now Morningside Ministries, continued operations and cared for thousands of seniors for 45 years. Unfortunately, in 2018, due to inadequate funding for long-term care programs, Morningside made the difficult decision to close the licensed facilities on campus. Shortly thereafter, Morningside began investigating future opportunities for the campus. Knowing the significance of the Chandler's estate to the community and to Morningside's own history, in early 2020, the decision was made to redevelop the property as an independent living community so that Morningside could continue its mission by offering reasonably priced housing and services to the San Antonio senior community. The Chandler estate welcomed back residents to the campus in early 2022. To continue the mission that the Chandlers began nearly 100 years ago, the decision was made in 2023 to renovate and restore the Chandlers' home for use as the organization's new corporate offices and an activity and learning center through its partnership with Oasis San Antonio. The 18-month renovation project was led by DFD Architects and general contractor TBA Healthcare Development. The work included full abatement of any unhealthy or hazardous materials and the removal of all existing mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems. After structural repairs were completed on the roof decking, a new synthetic tile roofing system was installed to maintain the house's historic character while providing a much higher durability. With a new roof in place, all new mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems were installed, along with new framing for updated bathrooms and support spaces on the first floor and offices on the second floor. Most of the original 1887 home's spaces were not modified, but rather restored as much as possible. The existing 137-year-old doors were refinished and refitted with antique brass and steel hinges. On the first floor, mother-of-pearl push-button electrical switches with brass cover plates complement the reproduction brass light fixtures hanging in the entry parlor, drawing room, library, and adorning the main stair. Antique brass pan light fixtures were carefully restored and installed in the sunroom, side entry hall, multipurpose room, and conference room. The smallest of details, like custom floor grills with a flower-inspired theme, artisanal ceiling fan pulls adorned with sunflowers, and barn swallows in the needlepoint artwork of the sunroom chairs bring elements of Mrs. Chandler's passion into every room. On the grand staircase, Mrs. Chandler's oil paintings had seen a century of neglect and abuse. During the renovation, they were removed for their safety, along with the two doors adorned with paintings of corn and banana trees. The staircase was refinished with newel posts created to match those lost over the years. Once an artist had carefully restored Mrs. Chandler's artwork to their former beauty, they were reinstalled in the stair with acrylic to protect them from future damage. The painted doors now hang on the walls of the main hallway to be enjoyed as the art that they are. The rear stair's new guardrail pays homage to the grand staircase and brings elements of the original Victorian home into a more contemporary interior of the renovated second-floor office space. After the stairs, the wood floors of the Chandler home are one of its most striking features. The detailed inlay patterns of the early 1900 wood flooring in the parlor, drawing room, and library were simply cleaned and protected with a new clear coating, the years of scratches simply adding to the patina. After removing years' worth of carpet and other sheet flooring, the beautiful tongue-and-groove wood flooring throughout the rest of the house was a delight to see refinished. Although mostly its original color of brick, the exterior of the home changed considerably in 1924 from its Victorian roots to an Art Deco style. At some point in its history, however, the decision was made to cover the beautiful deep red brick adorning the front door and all of the exterior windows and doors with beige paint. In lieu of a costly and possibly damaging process to remove the paint, it was decided the brick would be repainted as close as possible to its original color. The red brick color, along with a brighter accent tone found inside the attic, gave the exterior a fresh, new look while recognizing its more colorful past. New paint, a new roof, and a freshly screened upstairs porch breathed new life into the house. The Chandler home has grown and changed just like the city around it for the last 137 years. On a stable hillside of solid limestone, Mrs. Chandler grew gardens of flowers which she shared with others, and together she and E.B. built a home that has provided care and love for thousands of people. The Chandler home's foundation is as strong today as it was then, both in the brick of its walls and in the positive influence it has in the community. The Chandler home can now continue E.B. and May's wish to care for older adults through the communities of Morningside Ministries and on-site through educational enrichment programs and social events for decades to come. Welcome back to the Chandler home.